Fantastic. Here we are. Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm just going to get everything set up on our side. Here we are. And now for something completely different, I suppose. We are going to go into a workshop today. So I'm Shannon and I'm a member here of the innovation team at Fantasy Fellowship. Welcome to the Fantasy Fellowship Convention. So in this session today, we have the absolute pleasure of being joined by Kieran Larwood, the best-selling children's author of the Five Realms series, epic fantasy set in a world of rabbits. The Carnival of the last series and the most recent release, The Tree Keepers, which absolutely demonstrate exactly why Kieran is here to talk us through that. If you haven't already seen, there it is behind me. Kieran is also a very important part of the innovation team with the Fantasy Fellowship. Takes our artists. Thank him enough for turning his time doodle to what has our logo. So little purple frog, not too sure if you can see it in the background there behind me. That is all Kieran. Give us a wave.
Hello.
Hi. Okay, so just a few little housekeeping things then. This will be a little bit different from the other Q&As that you have already been on, hopefully this morning. You will be able to drop questions into the Q&A section and also the chat channel here in the Teams meeting. Use whichever one is available to you. If you've got some questions throughout, you can shout those out to Kieran as well. As he goes through this session, we'll be able to cover off some questions. All right, so we have just shy of 30 minutes then, so let's jump straight into it. Kieran, I'll hand it over to you.
Hello everyone, thanks for coming along. This is my map making workshop. So this is something I usually do in primary schools, so forgive me if I sound a bit patronising, but I usually do it with primary school children. But this is a workshop on how to draw your own fantasy map. Here's one I made earlier, so hopefully when you finish you should get something that looks like that. It's interactive, so if you've got a piece of paper and a pencil you can join in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through and try and draw here while I'm going, but you might not be able to see very well. So I've done a PowerPoint. I'll do a bit and then I'll upload the PowerPoint and then you can see what a bit closer on that. Okay, so first thing you need to do then to draw your fantasy map is you need to have a little bit of an idea of what kind of a world you want to create, whether it might be, I don't know, mostly island or mostly sea, something like that. And then you just get your piece of paper and start drawing your coastline. So you don't have to be an amazing artist to do this. You can do it really nice and simply. Just start doing a wiggly line for your coastline, bung in a couple of rivers like that. I'm just doing it super quick on here. So something like that. And then if you want to make it 3D, if you start from the bottom left hand side, you could just start putting some little lines for all the cliffs like this coming down, if you could see there. And then you can join them up by following the coastline like that. And then just to show which bit's the sea, you can add either some like ripples for the water or some waves like that. Okay, so that should be your first stage, something like that. Then you need to add in all the features on your land here. So things like mountains, forests, swamps, stuff like that. So I'm going to put some mountains on. Mountains usually go in a line, so like a mountain range. You can just put some upside down V's in. If you want to be quick or if you want to be detailed, you can add snow and things. I'm going to put a marsh around here. I'm going to use a little symbol for marsh, which is a line with some bits of grass poking out the top. A forest, I'm just going to do a big blob for my forest. But if you want to, if you've got time, you can draw all the trees. It does take forever. But my tip for drawing trees is start with the first row with all the trunks, and then you can just fill in the back like that. Yeah, you could have volcanoes, deserts, anything like that. I think I'll show you on my PowerPoint now if I can get it to work. I had a few problems with this earlier on, but let's just fingers crossed it works okay now.
The joys of technology never quite works right on the day, but that's fine. We've got plenty of other questions that we can ask throughout anyway, just to keep us going. You talked there about where to start. You know, you've gone through your coastline. quite a few of the questions that we had submitted actually at the start was, so Phoebe, Still, Hayley submitted a question. Well, what comes first for you? Is it the world of the story and the map, or do you usually start with that map?
I think I usually start off, because I'm quite a visual when I write. I usually have like a scene or an idea, and then the map is usually next. I remember reading about Tolkien. He said when he wrote The Hobbit, the first thing he did was drew a map. So especially if it's a fantasy world, yeah, it's a really good way to just kind of make everything concrete. And once you've done the map, it's like it starts becoming a real place. And you often find, I do this with lots of children workshops in schools. While they're drawing the map, they start building the story and thinking about what might happen as they're drawing the map, and then they go on to use it as a start to write stories. So, but I think can you see the outline there?
Yeah, got it.
And the second step there is with the coast and the water. And then the third step there, I've added some features on there as well. There's my forest and volcanoes and bits and bobs. And that's the easy bit. So once you've done that, then comes the tricky bit, and that is naming everything. So when you're making a fantasy world, it's not like if you're doing a historical story, everything has to be named, absolutely everything. So my tips for naming things are, well, first thing you have to name is the countries themselves. So when I was writing the 5 realms, I didn't know what to call the realm, so I went on Google and I looked up. I knew it was going to be about rabbits. I just looked up breeds of rabbit, and I picked all the names I thought were really cool. So that's what the names of all the realms are, actually breeds of rabbit. Or things like, if it's an animal and you know the Latin name, that's really useful. So I'm going to have like dragons living here, and the Latin name for dragon is Draco. So I'm going to call this country at the top here Dracovia. I'm just going to write that on in nice big capital letters across the top there. And then down here at the bottom, I'm going to mix it up. I'm going to have pigs living down here, and the Latin name for pigs is pork, so I'm going to call this Porcutia down the bottom here. There we go. So I've got my 2 countries, yeah, and it's going to be dragons versus pigs in this story. They're going to be at war, and then you have to name everything you drew on there. You have to name all of that as well. So my tips for naming features are to use adjectives. So, for example, mountains. If you think of a couple of adjectives for the mountains, like spiky and rocky, and then you put them together. So these are the spike rock mountains.
You are giving me lots of questions to ask about the tricky place for sure.
Oh, cool. Okay. And then the forest, gloomy, leafy. This is going to be gloom leaf forest here. So you go through and you name every feature you put on there. You name. And then after that, of course, you need to have somewhere for your characters to live. So you can either, I mean, if you're really artistic, you can draw all the little towns on, or you can just put dots on there where you want them to live. And then you've got to think of some names for the towns, and that's really hard. But my trick for that is think about who's living there, and then use things you know about place names. If you think of all the place names, they all have similar endings, don't they? Like Port or Mouth or Tun or Hampton. So I'm going to have dragons up here. So this is going to be Fire, and I'm going to call it Firewick. It's got a good name. And then down here, I've got pigs, haven't I? So pigs Oink. So I'm going to call this one Oink Home. Down there. Okay, so that's the basics of your map. And then I can show you, if I go back to my PowerPoint again.
Lots of allegiances coming in, plenty of Team Dragon. Oh, hang on. No, we do have some Team Pig as well. Possibly even split, actually. Who you were rooting for?
Me? I think, the pigs have got to beat the dragons, haven't they? That'd be quite an epic battle. Right, so here we are. Can you see my PowerPoint again?
It's just loading through. Yeah, got it.
So we got up to... Oh, there we go. There's the names of the countries on there. There's the names of all the all the features on there. And then, yeah, there's my towns and cities. And then I added some more details on there. So I don't know if you can see on there, little compass rose at the top, roads and streets and things, and some little sea monsters and boats and creatures in the water there. And then this is the fun bit. I don't know if you remember doing this at primary school, but you take your map and you scrunch it up into a ball. And then if there are any children watching, make sure you get a grown up to help you with this bit. You make a nice cup of black tea. Don't put milk in it or sugar, just black tea. And then you paint the tea all over your crumpled up map and put it in the oven just to dry out until it's nice and flat and crinkly. And then, where's my next slide? And then this is the super tricky bit. You must have a grown-up helping you. You can singe the edges of the map with a lighter, but don't hold it for too long because the whole map will go up in flames. And then I also put down there in the bottom corner a little, if you've got any sealing wax, I made a little seal and put that in the bottom corner there. And that's it. That's how you make your fantasy map.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And it's gorgeous to see a little bit of the detail as well that's gone into that. And the fact that you were able to put that down on paper there and then as well was fantastic. You mentioned a little bit about when you come to the names and the people and how you derive them from maybe the Latin or maybe the scientific versions of the names. And you said that the place names is quite difficult. What do you find? Why do you find that more difficult than the area?
I think because you want to have some cool names. They've got to sound really good. It's very tricky when you're thinking, especially if you're building a whole world and you've got lots of different countries, and each of those countries has multiple cities. Yeah, and you want it to sound quite convincing, quite realistic, but also quite cool. So it's very difficult, and a lot of times, you name things, and then the names you think of a better name while you're writing. You have to go back and change it all. But it's much easier if you can get the names down straight away when you're doing your map at the start, and then you start thinking about yourself. You start thinking of the place as like a place sounds a bit strange, but it becomes like a real place in your mind. It makes it easier, more convincing to write about.
And what's thinking of popping the five realms there? Get the book up, maybe easier to recognise for that. Of book about rabbits and the world is Warren. What came first, the rabbit or the Warren?
Well, I knew it was going to be about rabbits. That was my first idea. I was trying to think of like a really original fantasy story, something that hadn't been done before. And I know that there had been some about animals. There's the Brian Jacks books, the Moss Flower books. They're about all different types of animals, but there wasn't one just simply about kind of rabbits. So yeah, that was my first idea. And then from that, when I grew up in the countryside, I used to go out and take my dogs for walks. And I used to see all these big rabbit warrens, these big mounds of earth with all the rabbit holes in there. And I always used to wonder what was going on inside, and imagine they might be in there having little parties or, little shops and blacksmiths and things like that. So yeah, it all came from the idea of using rabbits, really.
That's good. And it's nice to hear you say, and one of the questions I was actually going to go on to is how much of your home life and your home country inspires the maps that you build and the worlds that you write?
Yeah, lots really. I'm very lucky 'cause I live on the Isle of Wight. I don't know if any of you have ever been, but it's very beautiful here, and we've got lots of different types of scenery kind of all crammed into one small island. So we've got like nice big forests, we've got like downs and moors, and we've got beaches obviously, and marshes. And so yeah, I do spend a lot of time out there, especially with my children, walking in nature and taking my dog for long walks. So all of that kind of went in. And also I think it's very important for children especially. I think they kind of lost touch a little bit with nature. I mean, when I grew up, we used to just be out running around in the fields all the time. Obviously, we can't do that nowadays. Things are different. But I think it does mean that children have lost a little bit of that kind of connection with nature. I remember reading somewhere that most children couldn't name, I don't know, 5 different types of tree or 5 different types of wildflower. So I try and get all of that in there and sort of share my love of it and hopefully kind of build a love of nature with the readers.
Yeah, and I think hopefully later on, and some of the if you've seen the schedule, you'll know that Kieran's on later today, 2 p.m. UK time. We'll absolutely dive a little bit more into that and just understand why children's books we'll save that one for later. Did have a question that was actually submitted prior to how to handle things distance. So things like the way that time works to travel distances in the world. There are things like trains and planes. They don't. And is there any easy way to research and action this?
So I didn't catch much of that, Shannon. Could you repeat it? Sorry.
Apologies. So one of the questions submitted prior was around how to handle things such as distance on maps, so the scale, and talking about how the time travel works when you don't have things such as cars and trains and planes.
Yeah, obviously it can be quite tricky, and I'm not very good at maps and distances and things like that. So I kind of try and I try to have like a scale on my maps, like a very rough scale. And if you work out walking distance in a day is, I think, about 20 miles, and then you use that to kind of work it out. But that is one thing I often have big problems with. And then luckily I have editors and proofreaders who go through and actually check that kind of thing. Yeah, and I get a lot of my corrections are, you said it took them 3 days to walk from here to here, but it would actually take 2 weeks. So I have to go back and change things. But yeah, I think like if you're actually going to use your map for writing and especially if it's going to be like an adult book, yeah, definitely build in some sort of scale. Uh, and try and keep to that, and think about things like you can research distances, like how long will it take to walk in a day, or how far can you go, and horse and cart and things like that.
Keep looking at the map there that we've got on screen in terms of building that scale. We've got tiny little, almost like a Loch Ness monster, and then you've got a big volcano. Would you say that's a good way to help scale in the map?
Yeah, I think this is obviously, especially for children's books, it's more of a pictorial map, I think, and it's just a kind of kids like to have like volcanoes and I don't know, people falling into pits of lava and things like that on there. So I think if I was doing a map for an actual fantasy book, I'd be a bit more serious about it. And yeah, obviously, but if you look at the old medieval maps, they were very pictorial, and they did have no idea of scale, and they did literally whack things on like dragons and sea monsters and stuff like that. So I think it's a lot more fun to do it like that, really, than if you're sitting there kind of, measuring stuff out and doing it accurately. Yeah, just let your imagination go wild.
Perfect recipe.
So I didn't hear that.
What would you say is the perfect recipe for the maps of key components?
Key components. So basically, I mean, it depends how you can use it. If it's just a bit of fun, you can just whack on whatever you like. But if you are going to use it to start a bit of story writing or kind of inspire you, just yeah, think about what kind of race your characters are. What might happen in the story. You can think about, for example, when I did the 5 realms, I was just putting stuff on the map, and I just thought, oh, this is kind of based on history, based on how Britain was in the Iron Age and the Bronze Age. They had lots of massive forests everywhere, so I just put a great big forest in the middle, thinking, oh, there'll probably be a forest there. But then it actually became really important to the story, and as the books went on, the third book in the series actually takes place kind of completely within this forest. So quite often when you're doing the maps, it actually dictates the story. So, if you're just thinking in your head, building a convincing landscape, and then it might take you off in different tangents of what might happen in your story. And it's really good to see children when they do it. They can tell you the story as they're doing the map. I'm going to have the goodies. They're going to live down here, and they're going to live in this town, and the villains live up here. But to get there, they have to go through this evil forest, and they have to find this magic item and in this desert, and it starts to build itself as you're kind of thinking as you're doing it. It's a way of kind of thinking visually.
And when you're doing these sessions with the children about the map making, and then also the books that you're writing, have you been inspired by the children and added an element of that into your map and your stories?
Yeah, they come up with some really good ideas actually. And especially some of the names are quite good. I think, oh, I might pinch that for mine later on. Yeah, but it's amazing to see some of them have like planned out a whole entire series of novels in the time it takes them to draw one map. So it's a really good way of getting them into just thinking of kind of the bigger scope of stories. And also, I mean, the thing with me about maps was, I remember when I was little, I used to read quite a lot, but when I was little, I mean, the only children's books around were like Enid Blyton and the Famous Five. And then one day I went to my parents' bookshop and I found a copy of The Hobbit, and it was the first fantasy book I've ever read. But the thing that opened up, the thing I saw was the map, and that was just blew my mind. That stories don't have to be set in the real world; you can create entirely new worlds. And just ever since seeing that kind of moment, that's what made me fall in love with fantasy, really. And even now, I'm sure when you get a fantasy book, the first thing I do is flip to the front and see if there's a map.
Yeah.
And it's really good fun. I mean, even like adult fantasy books are quite complex, aren't they? And sometimes, yeah, it's really good just to go back to the map and say, oh, they're here and they're going there. And yeah, I think it's really, really important. I'm quite disappointed if you open a book and there's no map. It's like, oh, come on, it's supposed to be a fantasy book.
Agreed, and it helps different readers get what they need from the story, doesn't it? So, as you said, quite a visual person, and some people need that to help build their understanding of the story. I'm sure that's quite important, especially for children's books as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, they often say, the thing they love the most about is the maps, and they send me their own pictures and maps and things like that. Yeah, it's just a real way of kind of connecting with the story and making it seem like a real place.
You said it grows with it as well. And how many times would you say you revise an initial map before you're happy with it as it grows along with the story?
Quite a lot. So I usually sort of pencil one in. Yeah, and it does change a bit as it goes through the story. And then um, when I've finished, I usually all my books. I have like amazing illustrators who do my books, but they luckily get me to draw the map. So then I go back and I draw like a finished map. Um, I've got my little Bible here with all my maps in, and then I put them in my book. So this is one of Nuki and the Ghost Barrel. This is a different sort of map, actually. This was a map of a city, which is also quite cool to do.
Wow.
With all the roads and things on there and different buildings, and a key down the side. Yeah, so I sit there. I spend quite a lot of time drawing maps for stories. And it's always really nice when you get to do the finished one and it gets sent off, and then obviously when you see it in the book.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, it must be really a good sense of accomplishment, especially when you can see very quickly and picture the story. I'm sure, but just by looking at a little bit of the map on the front, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and the Tree Keepers one was so cool because they asked me to do a map, and I thought it was going to be, just like my usual. I draw a map and they put it in the front, so I just sketched it out, quite roughly. But I didn't realize. Then they gave it to Chris Wormel, who's the amazing artist I had, and he took it and he did a woodcut of my original sketch. Um,
Wow.
so which just blew me away. And then it was so good that they decided to put it on the cover of the book. But yeah, so I didn't expect that at all. I thought it was going to be my little hand drawn map at the start, like all the other ones. So that really blew me away.
Oh, I can't even imagine how that felt to see that.
Yeah, I mean, it's so good. Yeah, he's such an amazing artist. So yeah, and I love woodcuts as well. They're really intricate and really detailed. Yeah, and it's really cool.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, plenty of agreement in the chat around the maps, and absolutely needing maps in terms of the books. Melissa, I'm always sad if they don't have maps. Sarah, love maps in books. Absolutely, it really does make it. You all have seen already gorgeous, gorgeous cover on the Tree Keepers, which is just the most stunning map that you built there. And having already started to read it as well, I'm forever flipping back to it. And I think it's a good sign of a sign of a good story as well, is when you're constantly flipping back to it, which is absolutely stunning. Um, okay, so plenty plenty of love there, Kieran. And I think people are going to try and tackle their own map making as well. So that'll be great to see what people come up with. But we are at time now, so thank you so much, Kieran, for giving up time to answer some of the questions and take us through this map making masterclass as well. And thank you all for joining the session. Apologies, I've seen some of the technical queries that have come in. Apologies that you've had to deal with that as well. We have other interviews and workshops on the schedule, and if you tune in at 2 o'clock later today, you UK time, you will hear more from Kieran, where we go through the full-scale author Q&A. Check out the schedule on our website at www.fantasyfellowship.co.uk/con 2022. Remember to follow us on Instagram, where you'll see that schedule again, where we are at fantasy_fellowship, and Twitter, where we are at fan fellowship. If you found the convention Discord for this event enjoyable, then we have a community Discord where you can chat all things bucket and everything else, so keep up to date with what's coming next. Thank you again, everyone, for joining, and I'll see you in the next one.